for allowing a scruffy Texas populist to come zooming into Canada for your prairie land political revival and all-day hog calling contest as you organized, strategized, and mobilized to bring Canada's farm, rural, labor, environmental, indigenous communities forward for the common good of your country and really of the globe. Just makes me happier than a flea at a dog show to be sitting here looking out at you across the many miles to my north as you take on the corporate greed heads, the political boneheads, to recapture our mutual values. What are those? Economic fairness, social justice, equal opportunity for all people. That is what we stand for. It's that that is what we are fighting for. It's not just price. It's not just profit. It's not just property. It's certainly not selfish gain. It's the fundamental democratic values of our society that we're struggling to recapture. Pathetically, the powers that be, as you know so well, are pushing an ethic of greed. I come to you this morning from right here in my kitchen in South Austin. On the south side, we have a little more irreverent attitude than some of the others do. We're a bit more iconoclastic. In fact, our unofficial slogan over here is that we're all here because we're not all there, and and I think that's what brings us together. Is that the powers that be in Canada as well as in the United States are not at all there in terms of understanding the basic fundamental principle of our society, which is that we're all in this together. Uh, they are knocking down the middle class, holding down the poor, and tearing down our democratic rights. They're as confused as goats on astroturf when it comes to understanding that concept of the common good, the notion that in fact we are all in this together. And when I say the powers that be, I'm talking about what I call the six B's, the bosses, bankers, billionaires, big shots, bastards, and bullshitters who think they're the top dogs and we're just a bunch of fire hydrants out here in the countryside. They are, in fact, thieves. Thieves in the sense that Woody Guthrie sang about in a ballad that came out of the Depression era called Pretty Boy Floyd the Outlaw. Woody had a verse in it said, "As through this world I travel, I see lots of funny men. Some will rob you with a six gun, and some with a fountain pen." It's the fountain pens who are doing the serious stealing in our society today. The Wall Street barons that Austin Ferrick writes about and talks about, the hedge fund hucksters, the pipeline profiteers, the corporateers who farm the farmers, and the billionaires, of course, who are brazenly buying out our government and our democracy. We recently had a little bit of unpleasantness politically here in the U.S. presidential election. But one thing it did was to flush out the oligarchs who intend to rule over the people. I'm talking about people like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos of Amazon, a guy named Peter Thiel, who's a Wall Street huckster. His name, by the way, conveniently rhymes with steel. Some of these guys are, let me just tell you, they're getting so rich they could afford to air condition hell. And I tell you what, they better be setting some money aside for that project, I think. uh, of course, they deny that. They say, well, yes, we make a lot of money. But then again, we give a little piece of it to charity. We are philanthropists, don't you know? Well, let me tell you a quick story about what the gods think of philanthropists. It's a story that Earl Long used to tell, who was governor of Louisiana, told about a rich man who died and tried to get into heaven. Well, you just don't walk into heaven. As I learned as a kid in that little Methodist church in Denison, Texas, I was taught that you've got to appear before an angel at the pearly gates, and that angel is going to review your life, and then decide, and then turn to Saint Peter, who will judge whether you get to come in to heaven or not. So here comes this rich man. And the angel looks over his life, says, "Oh my God, you never did no good, nobody, no way. What are you doing here?" And the rich man said, "Well, now wait a minute. That is not entirely true. There was that time in 1924 when I saw a beggar man. I put a nickel in his cup." And the angel said, "Well, that doesn't make up for a life of greed." He said, "Well, but what about 1934? There was that time I saw a homeless woman had a sign saying, 'Hungry, please help.' I gave her a nickel." And the angel said, "My God, that's pathetic." But the rich man said, "Now, wait a minute. I have a consistent pattern of philanthropy. There was that time in 1944, coming out of my bank at Christmas time, there was that Salvation Army kettle, and I put a nickel in there." And the angel turns back to St. Peter and says, "What in the world are we going to do with this man?" And St. Peter said, "Give him back his 15 cents and tell him to go to hell." That is the attitude that I think most people have in your country as well as mine. And it's not just, by the way, Trump. Uh, we have had 50 years in my country of both parties coddling monopolies. Monopoly is not an esoteric economic concept for farm families. It is the bully that they live with. It's real life. Uh, just look at the bottom line. When I first started writing in 1970s about farm families and the farm economy and the farm depression that was building at that time, uh, farmers were getting 42 cents out of every food dollar that the consumer spent. But we thought that was pretty outrageous, too low. Why aren't the farmers getting the bulk of it? Well, now farmers are getting 14 cents out of the consumer food dollar. Not even 3 nickels, 14 cents. I was in Iowa. I was part of the tractorcade movement here in the United States in the late 1970s and early 1980s. And I was in Iowa with a tractorcade rally. And a farmer came up to me and said, "Hightower, do you know the difference between a farmer and a pigeon?" And I said, "Well, no, I don't. I don't guess I do." And he said, "A pigeon can still make a deposit on a John Deere." That is uh, a humorous, but not so humorous reality in our society. Why is this happening? Why are farmers so-called dying out? That's the way the media put it. The family farm is dying out, like it's an old one whose time has come. Hogwash. They're being mugged in broad daylight by monopoly power. John Deere controls the tractor market, controls the sales, controls the repairs, and controls the future. John Deere is now beginning to sell a automatic self-driving tractor. The price on that, by the way, is $500,000 if you're interested in buying. That, of course, will lead to further concentration in corporate hands of agriculture policy. Cargill runs the global grain trade. JBS out of Brazil, Smithfield out of China, and Tyson out of Arkansas have 85% of the U.S. beef market, and they control pork and poultry as well. Bayer monopolizes world seed sales, not only monopolizing the sale, but also patenting the seeds so that family farmers who might want to try to save their seed and replant are outlaws if they dare to do so. And guess who makes these food policies? It's not farmers, it's not consumers, it's not environmentalists, it's not ordinary people. It happens to be the lawyers and the lobbyists and the economists for those corporate powers. Lawyers, lobbyists, and economists. People who could not run a watermelon stand if we gave them the melons and had the highway patrol flag down the customers for them. But they are in charge of writing our food policy in our country, here in the United States and in Canada as well. Which brings us then to us, uh, to you and me. As the founders of every successful, progressive, little d democratic movement in history, including Farmers Union, have realized grassroots organizing and agitation are the only true path to progress. So here we are again. And despite the current domination by monopolies and right wing nutballism and political plutocracy, the people are revolting in the very best sense of that term, revolting over this very concentration of power over the rest of us. Yes, there's Donald Trump now, elected to be president of the United States, but not elected by a majority of the people. He has never gotten a majority of votes. And in fact, people overwhelmingly oppose his plutocratic, autocratic, kleptocratic agenda. And at the same time, people overwhelmingly favor our progressive agenda of family farm based food economy, strong unions, environmental sanity, fairness, and opportunity for all people. Also, local activists all over. I do a good bit of traveling around the United States, and I'm in touch. I'm not depressed as I would be if I had to rely on the national media to get my understanding of what's going on. But luckily, I'm out there in the countryside and seeing enormous strides being made by ordinary people who are battling the bastards and winning uh, in fights over CAFOs, over pipelines, battles to get minimum wage, to get fit family leave, to get health care for all. All of those are making great progress in our country. Women's rights and voting rights are making progress. The rise of cooperatives and locally run media are taking force as well. As as a friend of mine who's been a pioneer in the organic movement put it to me once, he said, Hightower, those who say it can't be done should not interrupt those who are doing it. And that would be you, good folks, all across Canada, of all sorts, who are standing up and fighting for those values of fairness, justice, and opportunity for all. And again, winning. But winning takes the fiery spirit and the collective action of groups like Canadian Farmers Union. I think of CFU in terms of a little hardware store about a mile from where I'm sitting right now, called Harold's Hardware. It's not one of these chain operations. It's a local place, small but can do the job, and they have a great attitude. You go into Harold's and say and they say, well, what can we help you with? Well, I need to buy 3 nails, and they'll sell you 3 nails. You don't have to buy that whole package. And they'll say, well, what are you trying to do? And they'll say, let's pencil it out here and see what you need. And they'll loan you a tool. You can take a power drill home and use it, and then bring it back. The slogan at Harold's Hardware is, "Together we can do it yourself." That's got to be our slogan, doesn't it? We can't do it ourselves, but together there's no limit to what we can do, including rebuilding democracy, rebuilding fairness and opportunity. So my message to you this morning is simply keep on keeping on, only more so. We've got to reach out. We've got to keep building that coalition. Labor, of course, climate change people, consumers. They're all our allies, basically. As Jesse Jackson put it once, we might not all have come over on the same boat, but we're in the same boat now. That's a powerful reality. So we've got to realize them and reach out and make them part of our effort. They are supporters of family farmers. I do a lot of work with farmers markets. When I was agriculture commissioner here in Texas, we started the farmers market movement, or rather restarted it. It used to exist everywhere, and then it got driven out by the supermarket chains. But now we work with people locally, and there's more than 100. There's about 30 farmers markets right here in the Austin, Texas area alone. And it exists because people want it to exist. Farmers want it, consumers want it, the community wants it. It works. So that's policy. That kind of policy unites people and makes sense. And then, secondly, I would just say, mainly, persevere. You don't always win the first time out. Sometimes you don't win the second time out. But you keep keep moving, because sometimes even losing builds a movement because you learn more and you attract more support for it. Think of the suffrage movement uh, in Canada and certainly in my country. Here in the Seneca Falls Conference that was held, I believe it was in 1842, of women gathering together for the vote. Uh, None of those women lived to vote. Not one of them ever voted. But they created the movement and built the movement and sustained losses and continued to persevere to have the victory for the women's vote. That's the kind of perseverance that we've got to have. And the third thing I would say is intensify. Don't meekly beseech the powers that be for a little bit of fairness and justice. Demand it. And more importantly, become the powers that be. I'll leave you with this thought. Get to your questions, which is the most important part of this program, I think. This is a concluding thought that comes from, it refers to something we've always known in the South, and it comes from the late, great Southern humorist, Louis Grizzard, who said that there's a great big difference between being naked and being naked. Being naked means you have no clothes on. Being naked means you have no clothes on and you are up to something. That is our challenge. We've got to get up to something together. Let's get naked together. Thank you very much for hearing from me.
You can hear all the laughter in the room here through Zoom. I appreciate you bringing some humor into our convention. I think, as it was Austin that said the other night, that we need to bring humor to these discussions because they're just too depressing otherwise. So thank you for that. We'll open it up for questions now. We've got a good chunk of time. I think we've got almost 40 minutes. So if folks have questions, you can start making your way to the mic. And maybe just to get us started, unless there's somebody online yet. Yeah. Well, you mentioned, Jim, that you're seeing lots of examples of people battling the bastards and winning. And I'm wondering if you have any examples that you'd be able to share with us, maybe of recent struggles that have been successful and what strategies made them successful. I think it's particularly hard for us to see those types of wins in the mainstream media, right? And
Yeah.
often the only way that we can find out about them is through exchanges like this, and getting a chance for us Canadian farmers to talk directly to someone from Texas. So if you could share an example or two, and then we've got a couple people coming up for questions too. So
Very good. Yes, you're not going to hear these examples from the mainstream media. You're not going to hear it from the right wing media, for sure. But these are people's victories that, as I said, are occurring all across the country. One example is here in Texas, where we have a right wing governor, we have a right wing lieutenant governor, a right wing attorney general, a right wing Supreme Court, a right wing House of Representatives, a right wing Senate. We are overwhelmed with right wingers, thanks to gerrymandering, by the way, and thanks to money politics. We have two billionaires out in West Texas who have personally just sold, one of which has sold their oil company uh, and gained $24 billion that he's putting into politics in Texas. Big money has become bigger than big, is a monster. It used to be that you feared campaign contributions from corporations of $1 million. That's just the ante now. Now it's billions of dollars. The Koch brothers put $5 billion into their political operation this year. The difference, think about it, the difference between $1 million and $1 billion, think of it in terms of time. If you have 1 million seconds, that is 11 days. If you have 1 billion seconds, that's 31 years. That's the difference between being millionaires and billionaires dominating your politics. So people are fighting back against that. We had a movement here in Austin to limit campaign contributions. And it was a group called Austinites for a Little Less Corruption. And that attitude is pretty good. People could go with that, and it passed overwhelmingly, despite the total opposition of the political establishment here. It passed with 75% of the vote. But back to that right-wing legislature that we have, they're pushing to privatize our schools in this state. The governor is hot for it, as are the other office holders, except for Republicans, members of the legislature from rural areas. In those rural areas, the public school is the biggest employer. The public school is a central source of community and of culture. Uh, Legislators have spouses and sons and daughters and cousins working for those public schools. They do not want a corporate system to come in to run their public schools. So they have defeated again and again and again the right wing effort and the money effort to privatize our schools in Texas. People will stand up for common sense if we organize it and give it a chance to flower. Another example, just quickly, is up in Wisconsin, Canadian neighbor. Folks up there are battling to save nursing homes because they have, I think it's 29 counties that have publicly owned nursing homes, publicly owned and run nursing homes. They're tremendous facilities. People love them. They know the staff who are there. They know the doctors and the caretakers because they're right there in the community. So they support it. But here come, again, some right wingers getting elected to county commissioner positions and deciding that they would implement their ideological beliefs to privatize those public nursing homes. So there's a people's rebellion, and already some of these county commissioners are getting defeated because they stood against the people's nursing homes. So this is the kind of fight that makes a difference, and it unites people. By the way, those battles in Wisconsin, these are in red counties in Wisconsin, the rural areas of that state, and yet the folks who are maybe even MAGA Republicans still come together with the progressive forces who are there. And let us remember that while it looks like, if you listen to the mainstream media types, the corporate media, then you would assume that America has gone right wing. But no, it hasn't gone right wing. It has become non voting because the failure of my party to go out and stand for these democratic values. But where my party does stand for the democratic values, we win with people like Bernie Sanders, with people like Elizabeth Warren, with Jayapal, and our other good, solid, progressive members of Congress and members of the U.S. Senate. So we're not without strength, but we've got to focus it and have it become the dominant force within the Democratic Party. And that's the fight that I'm in currently. We will now be choosing a new Democratic Party chair in our country, and that's normally something you don't pay a lot of attention to because it's kind of inside the ballpark, sort of like a student body president election, really. But it is significant because it would mean that if we put an organizer in that position rather than an inside establishment figure, which is what we've had in the past, then they will move money out to the countryside and they will move focus out to the countryside where in some of the, even in the reddest counties, there are a third of the people who are very progressive. So we've just got to build on that. And we don't have to win all of those counties, but we have to cut the margin of loss in them. And we can do that by being there.
No. Yeah, thank you. All right, we'll go to maybe Mike 2 first, and then so Taryn first, and then Butch.
Is it okay? Thank you. Thank you, Jim. That was really inspiring in many ways. And I want to share what feels like a question and also maybe it's a comment and a reflection on some of the perspective that you've shared. Um, and it comes from a place of recognizing that we're in a long history of struggle um, that involves a lot of difference and diversity. And I know we're all really committed to building bridges and solidarity across difference. And I'm wondering about you mentioned Seneca Falls and the women's struggle to vote. And something that I've learned from Black feminists is that at that moment there was a big racial divide in the movement. And then, of course, you have the Sojourner Truth, "Ain't I a woman?" and that affirmation of the Black people's humanity and not belonging in the society.
Right.
um, and the coming forward of a different politics and understanding of, we can call it racism, white supremacy, racial capitalism. And here today we've had a lot of indigenous um, perspectives and worldviews being shared with us to create the way forward. And I wanted to raise this, open the space for you to share some of your experiences with bridge building and solidarity across racial divides, and especially and also in relation to the land and settler colonialism, and how you're seeing that as part of the next, the moment and where we need to go. Thank you.
Yes. Well, absolutely right. And the fact is that America has always been a work in progress. It was not a democracy by any means at the founding. It was a absolutely and frankly, just bluntly put, a plutocracy. Uh, you could not vote unless you owned property, and much less vote if you were African American or a woman, or again a person without property. So the vast majority of people had no electoral rights at all. So that was a part of the big struggle at the very start of our country, and we've been involved in that fight ever since. Uh, the to me the the single biggest political issue in our country, and I think probably in Canada as well, boils down to this reality: too few people control too much of the money and power, and they're using that control to get more for themselves at our expense. That's what it is. So that's the labor fight, that's the suffrage fight, that's the racial fight, racial justice fight, that's the environmental fight, that's any fight you want to think about. That is the populist reality that people have been rebelling against from the very founding of our countries. And now it is, and it has to be fought intentionally. For too long, Democrats, for example, well, of course, Democrats were the property owners, the slave owners, in the early times of our history in this country. Then it switched from Democrats to Republicans being the power elites, and now the working stiffs, the regular people, the indigenous communities, etc., are are having to battle that power again. And as I say, to battle it, you have to be intentional. Uh, I think of Jesse Jackson's campaign for president in 1988. Uh, it was the first time in our country that there was an intentional effort, a serious presidential candidate intentionally trying to establish a populist agenda with uh, racial involvement, racial continuity, racial democracy, really. So it was led by a black man, which made sense. It didn't seem to at the time, but it did. I endorsed Jesse Jackson when he ran for president. I was the agriculture commissioner at the time. It was not necessarily a popular opinion broadly in the Texas electorate at that time. But as I put it in my endorsement speech, which was made in the Senate chamber of our state with big portraits of Confederate generals paintings around the chamber there. But I said at the time that if Jesse Jackson is standing for the populist constituency that I believe in, if he's standing for the populist values and standing for the populist issues, then why am I not standing for him? And that led to or his candidacy, I mean, led to a true advance within the Democratic Party, but also within the larger country of an understanding of the potential of having a racial diversity taking power, and that it would amount to something good. And from that has come many much improvement, but so much further to go. And then, of course, a retraction by the Republican right-wing forces who are now trying to undo all of that and make it basically illegal. But they will not persevere in that. We have come across that bridge, and we're not there, but we're across the bridge at least. But we've not achieved what we wanted to achieve, and intentionally we have to be reaching out to all of those communities to make it possible.
Butch, and then we have two folks online that have questions.
Thank you, Butch Harder, Region 5. Why would the churches support Donald Trump? Why would the churches not support healthcare, public healthcare? I don't get it. And a lot of Canadians don't get it.
Well, a lot of Americans do. And by the way, churches is a very broad concept. There are plenty of churches that are very progressive and are solidly behind healthcare, racial equity, indigenous rights, including indigenous churches, etc. So let's not forget that we have strength within that religious community, and we have. But it is a huge fight, and it is one that the right wing recalcitrant church leaders who are pushing against racial equity and healthcare and all the other little d democratic issues are failing on. Look to the culture too. Willie Nelson has a song out that says, "You can't have your hatred and Jesus too. There are no exceptions to the rule. And if you think you can, you've been badly fooled. You can't have your hatred and Jesus too." That touches people in a way that speechifying by people like me won't touch. We have another song, a longtime group here called the Austin Lounge Lizards. They have quite a few fun songs, but one of them is "Jesus loves me, but he can't stand you." So, I mean, that's the absurdity of that position that they have, and it is not a majority position at all. But that's a fight. That's fights that progressives have got to make within their own church, and it is a rejection that we have to make as a larger community. That is not a sentiment that is of little d democratic value, and that we're pushing for a society that is united around those values of fairness, justice, and opportunity for all.
Sun, are you reading a question from online? Is that what's going on? Just 1 second. Can we try again?
The online question is from Karen Rothschild, and the question is, why do the rural areas appear to be more conservative, not only in the US, but in England and elsewhere in Europe?
Well, I think they're more conservative. Remember, the rural areas were quite progressive, at least until the 1960s or 70s. The New Deal was elected by rural counties. A friend of mine, Fred Harris, was U.S. Senator from Oklahoma, and he defeated a football coach, the University of Oklahoma football coach, more popular than what you cannot get in a state like Oklahoma, who was running for the Senate with big money backing him as a Republican. But Fred Harris, a little known state senator, won by going out and campaigning in those rural counties, and he won every rural county in Oklahoma. That was in 1964. So we're not that far removed from rural counties being very progressive, and including the populist movement itself in our country that came out of rural America. In fact, it began in Lampasas, Texas, a county just about an hour and a half north of where I'm sitting now. And spread all across the country. 43 states had strong populist movements that had interracial involvement in it, had strong labor support. The Knights of Labor were a part of the populist alliance at that time. So we have a history, and we should not lose sight of our history, because it's a conundrum over that issue of too few people controlling too much of the money and power. It's a constant battle. We win and then we fall back. We win and then we fall back a little bit. But overall, we're making progress, and you can't deny that about economically, racially, and even environmentally. As far short as we are from the goals within those communities, we still have made progress. And so we should take heart in that and build on that. Understand that that's what we're building on. That we're not starting over every time. We have strength, and we can apply that strength to the fight. But again, in our case, in this country, I mean, I'm a strong advocate, of course, for rural communities, and I'm a strong advocate within the Democratic Party, statewide and nationally, of putting money into rural areas. Yet we have a contingent, a powerful contingent. Our National Democratic Party is essentially run by consultants who make a ton of money in every election by losing elections, and then coming back and saying, you need us next time and we'll do better. And we don't do better because they're not going to the people. The Democratic Party in our country has become a Washington party. It is stuck in Washington. One clear example: in West Virginia, Virginia, and North Carolina, 3 states, were battling a pipeline to deliver natural gas, I think it is, and oil too, I think, for export abroad to the coast. And that pipeline was ripping through towns. It was ripping through farmlands. It was ripping through communities. It was ripping through state parks, state and national parks. It was ripping people apart. And the people kept opposing it. So they would fight and permit processes at a county level, state level, et cetera, again and again and again. And over 10 years, they defeated this pipeline. But then, through one senator from West Virginia, Joe Manchin, a coal baron, got Joe Biden, a Democrat, to support the pipeline. And they rigged a vote so that they could pass it. And they did, not understanding that they just stiffed this grassroots, decade-long movement by regular people to defeat that pipeline. They had defeated the pipeline. And then suddenly it came back within a couple of months because of a political ploy. And then the Democrats wonder, why are we losing those areas? Why aren't those people standing with us? Well, because we didn't stand with them. We stand symbolically with them, but we're not out there. Kamala Harris, presidential campaign, good race overall. She's way behind from the start. Stood for many, very, very good things. But she did not have a populist program at a grassroots level. She did not visit a single farm. She did not go to a state fair or a county fair. She didn't go to a rural health clinic. She had no presence in those rural areas, and so people notice if you're not paying attention to them, and if you don't seem to really care about them. And the fact is, the Democratic Party did not stand for the farmers, did not stand for those rural communities and Main Street businesses, and the desperate healthcare needs that they have. Now, Kamala Harris did put forth one very strong populist program, which was to give to have Medicare to provide health services in the home for senior citizens, and actually amounts to a time of dying that you could be cared for at home. Very, very good program, hugely supported. Like 90% of the people supported that. But she put it out there and then didn't campaign on it. So most people didn't know she'd ever said it. So we're not in the rural communities. If you're not there, then they're not going to be there for you. And so that's what I'm pitching, is that we've got to have a party that puts our political apparatus, meaning organization and people, back out there. It's not enough to have an office open in some county if that office doesn't do anything, if that office doesn't go to the county fairs, if it doesn't hold festivals for people, if it doesn't go door to door on a regular basis, not just on election time, and if it doesn't join the community in fighting for health care and clean water and the basics of life. So that's what we've got to get back to. And that's why rural areas are not voting for Democrats, is because Democrats have not voted for them.
Thanks for that insight, Jim. I think folks will also be interested to hear in about 15 minutes after we're done with this Q&A. Some folks from Food Secure Canada are going to be joining us to talk about the Eat, Think, Vote campaign. And that's a campaign specifically leading up to our federal election to organize community discussions around food and food sovereignty, food security, rural issues, and make sure that those things are included in the conversation and that those politicians know that we care about them. So I think we have one more question online from Dave, and then we'll go to Mandy.
Amazing. So this is a question from NFU member Tony McQuail online. He says, "Hi, Jim. You've been a hero of mine since the 1970s. Wonderful to hear you today. Do you have other paradigm changers, like the difference between an 11-day millionaire and a 31-year billionaire? A clear word or an effective illustration can beat statistics and facts for opening eyes."
Well, one thing that opens eyes and that opens minds is humor and is fun. And you just mentioned your efforts to go out. Mara did to go out with these campaigns in your regions, and to have discussions and etc. But have a little bit of beer and wine with that discussion. Have some music. Have some fun for kids. Bring everybody into it. Make that the populist movement in our country in the 1870s, 1880s began as a cultural movement. It was not a political movement. Farmers were far apart from each other. They didn't know each other. There was a lot of illiteracy, not ignorance, but illiteracy. They didn't have schools. So the populist movement first began doing that, get people together around festivals, around bands. They had parades, they had clown shows, circuses. And by the way, they also had 40,000 members of their speakers bureau. 40,000 people on any given night could go out and give the speech. How many people do we have as a progressive movement who go out and give the speech? Not 40, much less 40,000, but we could do that. The people in that room right there in Saskatchewan could be the speakers bureau. You can get high school teachers and college teachers, speech teachers to train people in it. It doesn't take a lot. and develop a network that is countering the right-wing media that now dominates through the social media avenues. So we have ways of getting out there to them. But again, the humor is the key that unlocks the mind. If you hear, if a speaker says, or a politician or whoever says, a preacher even, has a little bit of humor, particularly self-deprecating humor, then an audience might a little bit and say, "Oh well, all right, I might want to hear what this guy says." So, so find ways to make that happen, and find ways for your meetings to be fun, and for actually have a meeting that people would actually want to come to. How about that?
I think we're pretty good at that in the NFU. Mandy, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Oh my gosh, this is so fun. One of the problems that I have living about an hour and a half away from Edmonton is I could give food away for free and still can't get city folks, including politicians, to come out to the farm. So one of the challenges we have is this word called urbanism, where we have city folks that talk about farm issues, but they don't actually understand what it's like to not have access to a hospital because we're geographically different. So I like that you said bringing in humor, but sometimes, God, I try to be funny and I just sound really, really horrible. But my friend Corey used to say it like this, Mandy, you can educate the ignorant and you can medicate the sick, but you cannot fix stupid. And so that is a saving grace for me on a regular basis. But how do we bridge the conversation between our supporters and our allies in the urban areas and inspire them to visit us? A lot of your presentation today has focused around this, but this is one of the most defeating things when we are out there isolated on our farms and we know that the trees are getting cut and there's no ambulances and our school's likely going to be closed in the next 5 or 6 years, and everybody talks the talk, but until you come there it's difficult to really understand what we're fighting for. So we're living in this world where we know we have friends, but we have to drive to see those friends in the city. We also need them to drive to see us. I'll be very quick. How do you recommend inspiring that? And the second thing, if we are working with politicians, what is the best medium? I was once told you need at least 500 names on a petition or 500 letters going into that legislature office to get any attention. In your opinion, what is the best way to get a lawmaker's attention?
Run against the son of a bitch. That does it. Even if you're going to lose, run against them. And run against them in the Democratic primary, the Republican primary, whatever. But say we're here, and we're in your face. Now, also, and meanwhile, okay, you have to travel to the city to talk to the city, but you don't always have to drive there. We have a thing called the internet. We have Substacks. I didn't know what a Substack was 6 months ago, and now I am one. And we got 40,000 people tuning in to my little Substack. You could have your own Substack as Canadian Farmers Union, reaching your own members, but also reaching others, getting your members to say, okay, well, listen in on this next week, and your members being in touch with people, but also in the cities that they can hear it. And farmers markets are enormous communication opportunities that farmers usually don't use. They're there to sell product, and people come to them. You've got an audience coming to you because they like what you're doing. They like what you're selling. But you could also be selling farm policy to them. You could have little simple brochures. You could have a little slideshow. You could have a Substack thing, a video, etc., to give them, to hand out to them. and for them to share and begin to spread the word. We have to find our way around the establishment media. The establishment media is never going to get better at serving us. It is now a money media, and that's all it is. That's all they care about. So they're not going to cover our issues. So we have to do it ourselves, and we have to find ways to do it. And again, this has always been a case. The suffrage movement, the anti-slavery movement, anti-slavery had to create all their own newspapers and network. And more recently, the civil rights movement had African American radio stations, radio shows, using music to communicate with people, but also talking issues with them at the same time. I think of I lived in Washington D.C. for a while, and there was a bar there that was an Irish pub is very popular, but another bar opened across the street, and that bar wasn't getting any customers. But the bartender in the one across the street went into the pub and organized a bunny hop and bunny hopped the customers out of that bar into his. So some form of that is what we have to do. We have to find our way. We have to create our own media. And I come to you with some history of that. Not that I did it at the time, but was later a part of it. In Texas, in the 1950s, the progressives just were not covered at all by the media. The media at the time were the big city newspapers and some TV stations, radio stations. But newspapers wouldn't cover any progressive issues, much less a progressive candidate. So Ralph Yarborough, for whom I worked for a while, he was U.S. Senator from Texas. He could appear in Dallas and have 5,000 people at a rally. And the next morning, there would be nothing in the Dallas Morning News, even saying that he was there, that 5,000 people were there. So because of that, a populist gathering of unions with Farmers Union, by the way, Texas Farmers Union, with the Black associations, Mexican American associations, etc., came together and began to develop our own outreach mechanism. And labor funded a lot of it. It was political. We recruited candidates, but we also created the Texas Observer, a newspaper, a statewide news magazine, and it was created because there was no media coverage of the progressive cause, and they actually, the progressives at the time came up with a slogan for papers like the Dallas News. It said, Dallas Morning News, if it happens in Dallas, it's news to us. So, so people realize we've got to have our own mechanism of communicating, and they created one. And so you can do the same thing. And I bet some of you are. I bet some of you have your own internet following, even if it's just within your own family and your own organization. Those are powerful tools. Local media is more powerful than national media. And unfortunately, local media is being destroyed by conglomerates taking over local newspapers. But we can whine about that, or we can put our little heads together and see if we can't come up with our own media outreach. And that includes, by the way, that speakers bureau that I talked about. I mean, you could have a speakers bureau that goes into schools on a regular basis. Not just colleges and not just high schools, but even elementary schools. Speakers Bureau that goes to the civic clubs, Speakers Bureau that goes to the political meetings, that goes wherever, it goes into the churches, goes to wherever you can find an audience willing to hear you, giving you entree. So, I mean, that's kind of retail politics, but that is where we are. We can wish it was better, and we can try to make it better. But meanwhile, we've got to do the hard work, the door-to-door type of work. And by door-to-door, I don't mean at election time going up and saying, "Are you a Republican or are you a Democrat?" My own father, in that little town of Denison, Texas, small business guy, If a pollster had come to the door and said, "Are you a liberal or conservative?" He'd say, "Well, I guess I'm a conservative." But if you talk to him about the power of the oil industry to control the Texas legislature, if you talk to him about Walmart and what it was doing to his own business in downtown Denison, Texas, if you talk to him about those kind of issues, then you were in front of as progressive a human being as you ever wanted to be in front of. My father didn't know he had a political philosophy, but he did, and he expressed it in these terms. He said, "Jim, everybody does better when everybody does better." That's pretty simple, but it's also real.
Well said. I think we have time for one more question, so I'm going to go to Mike 1.
Actually, Ian was there before me. I just ran around to hear. Maybe you should let Ian.
Just very happy to hear your discussion. It's just amazing. I want to express that the National Farmers Union noticed that the United States was very successful in milk production a number of years ago, and our association advised the U.S. government and the Canadian government that we have supply management here, and that program would solve the tsunami of milk that threatens Canadian milk production. I guess comments?
Yes, you're absolutely right. I've been a supporter of supply management from the earliest days of my writing. I was close with Orrin Lee Staley, who was the head of the National Farmers Organization, which was primarily dairy producers that were dumping milk back in the late 1960s, and that led. In fact, he's the one who pointed out what land grant colleges in our country were doing to farmers and to consumers and to food, and he pointed out that I should pay attention to Earl Butz, a professor in University of Indiana, who became Nixon's agriculture secretary. Earl Butz was the guy who said to farmers, "Get big or get out." And then he said that it's not a bad thing that we're losing farmers in our country. It frees them up to do something worthwhile in their lives. This was the agriculture commissioner, agriculture secretary of the United States of America, saying farmers should find something to do with their lives that might be useful. Anyway, but that led to the American agriculture movement that did the tractor cades, strengthened the farmers union all across the country, and led to a big farmer rancher congress that was held in St. Louis in 1984 or 6 or somewhere in there, that Willie Nelson helped pull together with his Farm Aid organization, which still goes strong, by the way, and is still an invaluable asset. But we brought farmers together, and before they came to St. Louis, we had a year-long process of holding meetings, as you're talking about doing now, all across the country, in farm country, getting farmers together and saying, "What would you do if you were in charge of writing a farm policy?" And they wrote their own farm policy, and it was based on supply management. We didn't get the whole thing passed, but we got some of it passed, particularly the conservation reserve was a big victory that came out of that meeting alone. So progress can happen, but you've got to push it. And with strong ideas like supply management, that's one we have to keep pushing. Of course, the bastards push frantically against that idea because they benefit by your oversupply.
Thanks, Jim. We are at time. It's past 12 o'clock, so unfortunately don't have time for any more questions, but I'm going to ask Eli to come up and close us out and give Jim a big thank you.
Thank you all. I've enjoyed this very, very much. Thank you. I'm sorry I can't be with you.
Well, thank you so much, Jim, for speaking to us all here today. Your wisdom and wit and thoughtful words have been deeply appreciated by everyone in the room, and I just welcome us all to give a rowdy one last hands together for Jim Hightower.
Thank you all.